Welcome to episode 191 of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. I'm the host, Kim Newlove. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Nandita Koodie. She's a remote patient care services consultant for independent pharmacists, and you'll hear her talk about her business, Perfect Balance Healthcare, during our interview. She'll also talk about biblical counseling and her YouTube vlog, which is called Lick, Stick, and More. Today is Friday, December 23rd, 2022. It's nearly Christmas, and heads up, there will be references to the Christian faith in this episode. Merry Christmas, by the way. Now, although I truly believe that Jesus is the reason for the Christmas season, the Christian references in our conversation today will mostly pertain to how biblical counseling can help patients. All faiths are welcome to listen and learn. If you're new to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast, welcome. Again, my name is Kim Newlove, and I'm the host. I'm a pharmacist by training, but I'm not in clinical practice anymore. I made a career transition to voice actor and podcast host. I help clients get their point across in the medical space. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for women pharmacist authors and provide medical narration to clients in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and continuing medical education industries. How did I get into this? I was inspired by my nonverbal son, who has autism, to combine my background as a pharmacist with my speaking voice and launch my business, The Pharmacist's Voice, in 2017. My son Craig helped me realize the power of having a voice and using it. My solo podcast episodes are about some aspect of being a pharmacist, a voice actor, a pharmacist podcaster, or my career transition from pharmacist to voice actor and podcast host. My interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain so that you are inspired to use your voice too. This is episode 191, and you can find the show notes on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Just click on the podcast tab and search for episode 191. If you're interested in learning more about remote patient care services, biblical counseling, or Nandita's vlog, Lick, Stick, and More, you will enjoy this episode. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Nandita Koodie. Hi, Nandita. Welcome to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. How are you?
Thank you, friend. I'm doing great. Great to see you.
Great to see you, too. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
That's right. 'Tis the season. Yeah, it's great to get together with a friend for a podcast episode in December. Thanks for being with me. Today, I'd like to talk about three major areas. We're going to talk about your business, Perfect Balance Healthcare. We are going to talk about a book that you are writing. I love books. Can't wait to hear about that. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about your YouTube vlog, Lick, Stick, and More. But first, let's start with Perfect Balance Healthcare. What is it and what do you do?
Oh gosh, well, Perfect Balance Healthcare is my baby. I started PBH back in 2017, working direct to patient, doing cash patient care services like grocery walkthroughs. I was creating these awesome tea blends to really help identify what patients' needs were, where they were at, what they were struggling with, to open up conversations about how I can support them holistically, doing comprehensive services, basically as their liaison, right? A lot of patients struggle with trying to keep up with all of their medications, who their different doctors are, and just making sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. And I think a piece that was really missing at the time that I identified was getting them connected with their care team, right? Whether it be family members or other friends and support people who were actively involved in their health, and making sure that there was alignment there with what's going on, and making sure that they were educated on what some of these things are and all of that. So I did that for a bit. What I found was that time is really hard to manage when you're one person and you're working maybe full-time somewhere else. And I was trying to transition into working for PBH full-time. And so I started exploring ways to make my services more accessible to patients and to create a more scalable model. So I started working more as a consultant once I had started getting into billable services and exploring that on my own collaboratively with practitioners in my area. I started consulting independent pharmacists on how to start their own consulting practice, how to make their own PBH and pursue their passions and marrying it with pharmacy or whatever it is that they were doing clinically. And that was really fulfilling. I figured, man, this is something that I wish I could share out nationally, maybe globally, right? And help people understand all the different things that pharmacists could be doing and how we can better serve patients in our communities. So that really led me into working business to business with pharmacy owners, particularly independent pharmacy owners. And that has been just really a huge hole in my heart that has been filled with being able to support them with understanding how to thrive rather than just survive with all of the changes that are happening in that industry, and finding a space where some of these independent pharmacists can kind of plug in and establish a continuum of care from the point of diagnosis through the therapeutics that's happening at the pharmacy, and then caring for the patients remotely, and then thereafter leveraging remote billable services. Started doing some consulting with independent pharmacists, and PBH has really just kept evolving. One of the things that it has evolved to address is mental and behavioral health challenges that patients have as well, and leaning into billable services around those services and continuous glucose monitoring as well, as I kind of expanded upon what we could be doing with diabetic patients, having experienced gestational diabetes myself and getting a view from the patient's perspective as to what those challenges look like. So that's really where I'm at now, is helping to equip pharmacists, pharmacy owners, and other practitioners who are interested in understanding medical billing, right? And understanding some of these patient care services and how they could be leveraging them to better care for their patients. Because one of the things I really saw that we were challenged with as a profession is, how can we afford to do patient consultations? And how do we make that accessible to patients in a way where we're not tethered to the bench and depending so much on the product side of our business? But how can we step away and really be there to actively listen to our patients' needs and respond to that with addressing social determinants of health and some of these other buzzwords that you may be hearing in the industry? So that's pretty much where I'm at now today, with PBH is supporting in that capacity.
How did you discover your passion for helping independent pharmacies?
Well, I had started off working with the big box chains. And I got to see where the challenges were with being able to connect with patients on a level that I wasn't getting, right? And so that kind of led me to exploring what other types of community pharmacy settings existed. I was living in South Florida at the time, and I started reaching out to independent pharmacy owners there and saying, hey, is there an opportunity for me to support you with doing MTMs maybe, or other services that they were already familiar with, maybe expanding on their immunization services, and thinking about how they can leverage the time that they were spending doing that to have more open conversations with patients, maybe switching into an appointment-based model. And so that really got my gears turning on really focusing in on the independent pharmacy space and seeing the value and the alignment of the passion that I had with their vision as to why they even opened their store, and didn't choose to just work at a Walgreens or a CVS or Walmart. While I am very happy that these entities exist because they do serve such a mass part of our patient population, I feel like independent pharmacy owners have the opportunity to lead by example with regard to delivering patient care services where it's really centered on the patient and not product or even service centered, but truly patient centered. So I think it has been a lot easier for me to work with them as opposed to trying to work at a corporate level to change an entire company that's as massive as some of the big box chains can be. I was receiving a lot more willingness to work with me with just one pharmacy owner versus having to convince an entire corporation to take on and to have the agile ability to implement some of the strategies that I was recommending.
Yes, independent pharmacies don't have to operate at scale. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, that's a great point too. And being agile when you're just that solopreneur or that individual pharmacy and not having to worry about all the chains. That's a great point too. Now, you add some sort of a remote pharmacy piece. How do you switch from wanting to work with independents to then adding this remote pharmacy practice as well? How'd that come to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we discover comes from needs of our own that we're able to identify and then say, wow, that was really valuable. I'm sure there's other people that can utilize that. And that's basically where I was at. I was working full time for a big box chain, or I was working full time for a long term care facility or mail order facilities, just different environments throughout my career. But trying to figure out, well, what can I do that I can plug in a way that I don't have to physically be there because I don't have that bandwidth to travel often, or I don't have that time to step away from my family as often as I'd like. So, how do I create more time? And leveraging telehealth really allowed me to open that up. I was doing a lot of house visits with my patients with PBH in the beginning. And it was difficult to travel, find time to travel for them. And if there was a rescheduling, it ended up being a huge gap in my time that I could have been serving someone else. Whereas leveraging telehealth allowed me to kind of switch things around and serve more people more efficiently. And it be more comfortable and convenient for them as well. So being able to get into the home environment without necessarily having to be there physically and see the barriers to care was really attractive part of remote services. And I also saw it as a means for other women like myself who were juggling motherhood, right? Or, taking care of home or whatever the case may be, while also trying to provide. It just allows us to do that more easily if we're stationed working from home. So that to me was a need that I was looking to fill for myself that allowed me to design the program in a way that it could operate from home, but also hybrid where I can work part-time in a pharmacy or I can work part-time at the clinic and kind of create the dream role for myself based on what percentage of time I'd want to attribute to each place. But one of the things you touched upon that also helped me to understand the benefits of building a remote program was the fact that some pharmacy owners do have chains, right? They do have multiple locations. And this is a service that would allow maybe just having one staff member from one location service multiple stores remotely without having to staff each individual store to provide these services and scale up their program. So that was particularly interesting to apply in the independent pharmacy space with some of our pharmacy owners who are just finding great success with expanding their operations as well.
That's a great point. Being able to plug someone in that already works for you at multiple locations. That is a great point. Yeah, that's a good selling point. Now, how about the billing aspect? A lot of pharmacists hate billing. How do you sell them on that? I mean, do you have a model that you've already figured out and you just, you know, give it to them, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls that I've seen with independent pharmacy is we're pretty much limiting ourselves to what each other is already doing, or we're waiting for someone else to step out onto the ice before we go out there on our skates, right? So a lot of owners will just use what's already being used in the pharmacy space. The problem I'm seeing is we're trying to step into medical services that are collaborative care services in some instances, where we're collaborating with physicians or other practitioners under the medical model that's not necessarily operating from the pharmacy level, right? And so we're trying to fit medical programs into pharmacy boxes and they just don't fit, right? So what I've been trying to do with my coaching is help to shed light on what are some of the solutions and strategies that primary care practitioners are finding success with, because we're basically stepping into supporting them in their world. Let's leverage those and work with their teams and what they're using and what's working for them, versus trying to bend what we have to supporting those programs. So I give options, right? It depends on the different pharmacists' situations and scenarios. Some of them have their own clinics. Some of them have collaborative relationships already established. And some pharmacists are not anywhere. They're literally maybe working at a big box chain and they're just trying to start their own consulting practice. And they're trying to see, well, how do I do billing? And in those cases, we traditionally just end up using whatever billing solution whoever they're collaborating with is using. So in some instances, some pharmacy owners are already paying a ton of money for whatever solution they currently have in their pharmacy. So we may start there, but eventually
Mm.
we migrate them to a solution once they're profitable to stepping into what's working in the medical industry, and leveraging those services. And to answer your question, there are different levels of support that I can provide, whether it be, hey, let's leverage what you have, B, let's leverage what your collaborator has, C, here are some solutions that are working in the industry, or D, I have a done for you, right? I have different partners in the industry that offer billing solutions that I can connect you with based on your needs and what I'm hearing you'd like to provide. These are the people who are best fashioned to bill for those services because they're already doing it. And it's not going to be a trial and error for you to try to figure it out, right? And just connecting them with that. So I think leveraging my network there has been particularly beneficial to answering some of those questions. But also, I spend a little bit of time in the beginning of working with my clients, helping them to understand basic medical billing. As to your point, a lot of people hate what they don't know, right? Or they're not comfortable with. So just
they fear the unknown.
Exactly. So giving them the confidence by educating them on, okay, what are some key terms that you should know? What should you be looking for from a supervisory standpoint when you're looking at your EOB report to see if it's actually being optimized or if you're missing opportunities here? Or do you have any tracking mechanisms for reconciliation? Or are you just hoping that what you're submitting is getting paid? And then you turn around and you're wondering what's going on, right? So sometimes it just comes down to systems and processes, or assigning different staff to different roles and helping them understand where those kinks are in the workflow to create a more well-oiled machine for medical billing, with the educational aspect and getting their staff trained up to do that, or getting them connected to people who are already certified or trained to do that.
Would you say you do more business to business consulting or business to other pharmacist consulting?
I would say currently I'm doing more business to business consulting. I work with individuals, which it doesn't really feel like business to business too much because I'm not really doing a heavier percentage of my time on connecting people so much as working one-on-one with people, right? I do a lot of implementation support with individuals to equip them. So let's say a pharmacy owner is interested in implementing a continuous glucose monitoring program. I would help to identify, okay, well, is it you that has the bandwidth to work with me to implement this? Or is it going to be a champion pharmacist on your staff or partner that you'd like for me to work with? How much of this do you want done for you? How much of this do you want to keep in-house? And working with them to build it out. But it's really one-on-one there. And it's not so much, here, let me just connect you to a billing solution, or let me just connect you to, how you get this set up. From a compliance standpoint, I basically would work with them one-on-one. So it's business to business in the sense between PBH and the pharmacist or pharmacy owner that I'm working with, but it's really individual support.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about when it comes to PBH before we move on to your book?
Yeah, I think one of the most, one of my favorite aspects of the company is the ability to identify people's strengths and passions and marrying it to their practice, right? I had one client that I can remember that her passion was web design. And I really understood the needs of pharmacy owners with regard to having templates done for them for different things, especially with the height of COVID. People didn't have systems and processes in place for tracking, or for reporting things. And so having templates to be able to have as a conversation guide or for record keeping purposes, for different things, helping her build a program that was specific to CHF. For transitions of care, and marrying her skills as a web designer and template specialist to saying, hey, I have a program that's done for you that you can see the quality of my work, but I'm available to create templates for your practice that are clinical, right? That are applicable and compliant. And that was just awesome to be able to empower her to do that and build her own practice around her passion for web design and marrying it to her clinical expertise. So that's just an example of how PBH functions, really just to help people take a look at the patient care service map. Here's everything that a pharmacist can do, whether it's pharmacy billable or practitioner billable as a collaborative model, and understanding that all of this can be done cash, helping them map out what type of services do you want to provide? What are you passionate about? Let's help you package that. Let's help you stand up your own practice. What does that take to start your own company? Let me help you with that. And then helping them to actually, as a done with you, done for you, as opposed to just educating you on how to pitch. Let me work with you to reach out to your prospects and help you understand who your ideal prospect is and your specific community based on your specific network and the opportunities there. And then working with you to actually implement your program with you, holding your hand each step of the way, creating stepwise processes, providing you with done for you templates for different services, to where you're not starting from scratch and trying to trial and error to see what you still need, but having all of these things pretty much already done. And then walking through all the way through billing reconciliation to make sure that what you have is sustainable, right? Is this replicable? Is this something that you can roll out at other stores or other locations or other collaborators? And do you have different mechanisms in place for sustainability, such as continuous patient enrollment and retention strategies and quality assurance with your billing processes? So I think that's the piece that I saw that was missing that I needed when I had first started getting into this space, collaborating with practitioners, is I didn't have that one-on-one support to say, how do I apply what I'm learning and the textbook answers to my specific opportunities? Can somebody please tell me how this applies to this clinic? And walking with me to make sure that it's being done in a compliant way. And so that's really the piece of PBH that I think is, in essence, different than what a lot of people are offering, is that really hands-on, one-on-one support with access to live examples to learn and grow from, as opposed to theoreticals.
There is a certain amount of hand-holding that some people like, and it is not a bad thing. And that whole hand-holding term is definitely not a negative thing. When I start something new, I need a certain amount of hand-holding.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know that that is something that you offer, because some people, like you said, there's just one offering and it is not individualized. It is nice to hear that you do individualize what you offer. It sounds like you had a pharmacist come to you that was good at graphic design. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Phenomenal. And, I think when you find what people are passionate about, it's easier to get them on board with implementing it because they love it so much, as opposed to, I'm just going to go do this because of XYZ. And it's not even, something that is in alignment with what would be God honoring, right? Like, it should, in my opinion, I think whatever we do, whether we're healthcare practitioners or otherwise, should all be, how can we better serve others to the glory of God, right? And is what I'm doing morally acceptable in that light? And so that's kind of like the question I had to ask myself when I was working in other industries and different companies was, can I really get on board with the level of care that I'm providing here in the now? Or what is it that I feel like is my gift to offer people to love them more and to provide them truth around their lives and supporting them, right? And so finding out what that is for people is really fulfilling, and supporting them in uncovering their strengths and what they have to offer. And in that case, yes, with this pharmacist, it was web design, right? That she felt like was her talent, that she can offer to help people customize how they could better care for people in a compliant way.
Very cool. That is a rare gift. Not everybody that's a pharmacist is into web design or graphic design, any of that stuff. That's
Right.
a gem you found right there. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many owners that struggle with that stuff, like content design and template design.
Well, and understanding what it is that you're doing. I mean, I've worked with graphic designers too, and I'm not saying that they're hard to work with at all, but they want to understand so that they can get the graphic right. If it's an infographic or a podcast artwork or a audiobook artwork or whatever we're talking about, they just want to get it right. But if you start with somebody who just understands what you're trying to do anyways, you can kind of skip a couple of steps, and I like that.
Yeah, you're totally right. I saw that even in the RPM industry, right? Like, a lot of the software companies that are offering RPM services are software engineers. They're not clinicians. So it's really difficult for them to understand the true pain points behind the clients that they serve, because they're not the client, right? But when you have someone who's a pharmacist who's working with RPM vendors and CCM vendors, then it's like, okay, well, you actually get it. You get what I need practically at a clinic level for this to work. And so having those insights make it a lot easier to get your program off the ground, as opposed to, like you said, having to first educate your collaborator, whoever it is, whether it be web design or remote patient monitoring services, having to educate them first on what it is that you need before you can actually apply their services, right?
Hey, you just threw out a couple of acronyms. I got to stop for a second and have you define what's RPM?
Yeah, remote patient monitoring or remote physiological monitoring is a technical term for it.
Okay.
Essentially, it's where we give patients devices like a blood pressure monitor or a glucometer that tracks their physiological data, transmits data in real time to a cloud-based platform that's shared between the practitioner, the pharmacist and their care team, and the patient's care team to give them some visibility on how they're doing. And that's all billable now. So that's awesome.
Awesome. And what's CCM?
CCM is chronic care management. So that's basically educating patients on how to respond to things like the data that's coming in from their device, or educating them on how to take control over whatever condition that they're struggling with. What should you do if you have a hypo or hyperglycemic event? What should you have on hand? And having some of those conversations. So it's really a great opportunity for us as practitioners to come in and address social determinants of health and empower our patients to get connected to community-based organizations for support holistically with their healthcare needs.
I admire your passion for this. This is not my jam, but I can tell that it is yours.
I do love it. I do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm happy for you that you found your niche in RPM and CCM and helping out business to business, all these pharmacies that need to do all the things that you know how to do. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing how you use your voice as a pharmacist. But I do want to move on to a couple other things that you've got cooking. One is you are writing a book. What can you tell me about your book?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. It's my first book. I fell into biblical counseling. I was looking for a standard by which I can coach patients as a wellness coach with regard to their lifestyle modifications, right? And getting to the heart of their behavioral issues, right? How can I empower them to make the right decisions with regard to their diet or exercise or whatever the aspect that they were struggling with in their life? And really, I couldn't think of a higher authority than the Bible by which to coach my patients to righteousness and understanding the difference between physical medical issues and spiritual behavioral issues, and supporting them with truth around how do you battle this and how do you find success with tackling some of the things that you're struggling with in your personal life with regard to response to people, things, and circumstances. So I'm writing a book on, it's called Pointing Patients to Christ, a guide to implementing biblical counseling in healthcare, because it's something that I didn't even know existed. It was something that I kind of fell into doing a self-confrontation course to kind of strengthen my own faith and uncovering this wonderful world of biblical counseling where there's all of these counselors that are available in communities to support patients who are struggling with behavioral health issues. And it not necessarily be operating in the medical model, but just kind of addressing some of the issues where a lot of people feel like the answer to behavioral issues needs to just automatically get directed to psychiatry or psychology for support with medications, where that may not be necessary, right? And so just kind of deprescribing a bit and thinking about, okay, is this a medical issue or is it something else, and addressing it appropriately? And I found that biblical counseling was just amazing with regard to the efficacy and the impact that it can have on helping people transform their lives permanently, right? And in ways that I wasn't seeing in the medical model where a lot of these problems are being directed. So just kind of opening the world's eyes a bit to the opportunity to lean into biblical counselors in your area. And for those of us who want to get equipped to do biblical counseling ourselves, understanding what the different pathways are for that, to get equipped and just documenting my journey through that as I get certified, to turn around and help others to get into it as well.
Wow. Now, you're saying that this is a modality that will help individuals who have behavioral health concerns. So we're talking about Alcoholism, opioid addiction, depression, anxiety. What else?
Absolutely. I mean, there's just so many different aspects of our lives that ultimately all impact us holistically, right? People can be struggling with issues such as parenting, right? Where that's impacting them financially, it's impacting them, their stress levels, it's impacting their health, right? They may be engaging in unhealthy habits and risky behaviors. There's obviously marriage and relationships and issues there. Conflict management, I think even in a professional setting, right? And you talk about leadership, a lot of that's very similar to parenting, right?
You know it.
And so kind of just saying, okay, well, what does the Bible say? What does God have to say about how we handle some of these situations, whether it be from an HR perspective or from just from a relational perspective or grief, right? When you're struggling with loss, I had a patient that her husband had passed away a decade ago, and they were looking at increasing her Lexapro because it wasn't working anymore, and she's elderly, and I'm just like, well, at what point do we address the root issue here, the underlying need for that medication, and support her in maybe tapering off if she doesn't need it anymore? And it wasn't long before she was off of it, and she didn't really need it anymore, but nobody had ever asked, or encouraged that. She just kept taking it because it was something that was being refilled, right? So just having those conversations and connecting with our patients on a deeper level, I think is really important.
Mm. Now, not every pharmacy location allows faith to come into business. So, wow, I'd really like to hear how you recommend people implement biblical counseling at the pharmacy counter, basically.
You're so right. I think the reason that I got into this so late, like connecting the dots between biblical care and healthcare, was because it wasn't promoted where I was working initially, right? It was like, no, no. There are hot topics and political issues that you just can't discuss with patients, and you sign these documents, that saying that this is going to stay separate. And I've seen that, right? I've seen where God has been separated from so many different aspects of our lives in and outside of healthcare. I mean, it's a wonder that it still says, "In God we trust" on some of our bills, right? We've seen, in our school systems and different areas where that's definitely not the case. And so, yeah, it was a challenge for me to connect those dots initially, but I was really blessed to have the opportunity. I was really blessed to have the opportunity to step into an independent pharmacy where the owner was Catholic and was open to me sharing scripture with patients who were open to receiving it. And to be honest with you, it really strengthened those patient relationships when I was able to offer hope in darkness, and light in areas where patients needed it, and truth and encouragement. And it was truly transformative to be able to see people get control over their issues that they were depending on medications for, and still being able to find value to supporting them in other ways at the pharmacy level, and not necessarily depending on dispensing for those relationships to continue to exist. So that was really where I got my in with trying it out, was sharing the word directly with patients and seeing the impact on it, was at the independent pharmacy that I was working at, and him just being open to me doing that. In other areas, I started with my own practice, even with collaborators, praying on my Zoom calls, right? It's something that I oftentimes would hear from other people, that it was their first time having someone pray with them at the beginning of a meeting or at the end of a meeting, and just kind of encouraging them to let God shine in every aspect of your life, I think was really fulfilling for me to be able to share that out as well. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of issues with, it could be a touchy topic for a lot of companies. And so just being able to feel out who your leadership is and your authority people are and how they feel about it, and having open conversations about it, and then sharing the benefits that it could have where used appropriately, I think is really a great best practice.
I will be curious to see a little bit more about this book when it comes out. I want to read it, but I hope you make the audiobook, because of course I love audiobooks.
Well,
But
I'll be
I
listening
think,
to you for that if you're interested.
oh, all right, we'll have to talk about that. But I feel like giving people the words to use in this book will be very helpful. Like, you know how probably in pharmacy school, a lot of people did the role playing where you have somebody play the role of the pharmacist, you have somebody play the role of the patient, and maybe even there's a doctor too, because you're communicating with the doctor. I think Mrs. Smith needs to increase her Lexapro because she's just not responding. She comes in every month for a refill and she just seems even more depressed. And then you could talk about how biblical counseling can be used and what words you use. So people, honestly, sometimes people need a script before they can put their own flavor on it. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you touched on a really important point, and it's something that the biblical counseling movement is really struggling with right now to make sure that they're not stepping over into the wrong areas, right? Because there's such a gray line between psycho and somatic problems. We don't want to be seen as providing medical advice or stepping over, what another specialist may be recommending or another doctor may be recommending. But just really understanding that there's a difference between medical and spiritual issues while there's a lot of overlap and impact on each other holistically. We're taking off the white coat here when we step into a biblical counseling session with a patient and we're saying, hey, we're going to look at this with with a biblical lens as to what you're experiencing in your life. And if you want me to put my white coat back on, we can talk about what you're dealing with physiologically, right? And we can talk about your medications and the effects that they're having, and we can have a conversation with your practitioner to talk through if it's necessary for you to continue on this or not, as you find success in other areas of your life, right? But being very careful about the legal aspects around biblical counseling is something that I would discuss in that wording, Kim, if you will, in the book is, okay, how do we navigate getting into this space without it being a conflict of interest with our medical practitioners, being there to be complementary and not competitive in the services that we offer to better care for our patients holistically and lean into some of these community resources to support our patients.
You said an important word, community. Sometimes that is what is missing spiritually with some of the patients that I've seen in my life, even. They're just bored or they have inserted some sort of a bad habit into their life because they are trying to fill up something that is missing. And I don't think I need to go any further. I think we all have had patients who have developed some sort of a mental health issue because of something that's happened in their life. And using biblical counseling, I think, is just one of many tools that can be used to improve spiritually somebody's life and maybe help them even extend their community resources. If you give them biblical counseling and they feel called to go out then and find a church, then they are expanding their community. They now have people who can bear their burdens with them and care about seeing them every Sunday, miss them when they're gone. I mean, feel free to jump in here. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. And there's so many different pillars to it, right? It's not anything that the biblical counselor is doing. We're just the straw through which people can drink the goodness of what God has to offer. We're just the vessel, an instrument in the Redeemer's hands, if you will, to just point patients to the bread as sinners who need the bread ourselves, right? But just sharing with them the treasure that we have in Christ. And so prayer is often something we already see in chaplain services, oftentimes at hospital systems and different clinical models. As you mentioned, one resource is the word, but it's not so much a self-help guide as it is having a relationship with God and understanding how to foster that in a way that it's going to impact your life permanently and transformatively. As you mentioned, through fellowship, where iron sharpens iron, where you're in a body where you're not isolated, where the devil can prey on you and you're coming up with your own interpretations, but you're being checked and balanced by other members of the body who are all collectively functioning to support you, whether in times of trial or you're supporting them and ministering to them and growing in faith yourself as you minister to them. Of course, a big part of what biblical counselors do is they offer hope in the darkness and guidance on what to put on and what to put off to practice this transformative change. And so, yeah, it really is something that is community based, and that's why it's important to get people connected to their local churches that are equipped to help them.
Mm-hmm. when we talk about biblical counseling and using it in medicine, there's going to be somebody out there that says, yeah, you can learn about biblical counseling, but can you monetize it? To those people who may be thinking that, there's nothing wrong with thinking that. I'm not trying to shame anyone. But what are your thoughts on that? Is biblical counseling something that you can monetize other than writing your book, of course?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because I just got back from a conference with biblical counselors, and I asked this question myself to kind of see where people stood with it. Because as I know, it's really difficult for practitioners to be able to open their time up to afford to be able to provide this to more people if it's not monetized in some way that will allow them to spend that time to be able to step away from what they were doing full time to doing this part time comfortably, right? So I could see where it's not necessarily the motivation for it, but it's more of like a means to be able to provide that and open up that service. Most people accept donations from the church to do that, or from the individuals who they're serving. Some people charge anywhere from $70 to $120 an hour for their services because of the level of care that they're
Facilitation.
providing. Yeah, to
Yeah.
that family or to that
Mhm.
patient or counselee, if you will. But it's really just up to that individual's level of what's appropriate, and being cognizant of that, and making sure that it's something that's happening in collaboration with a church, I think is important. And there are biblical counseling centers where they just operate. They have to keep the lights on. They have to keep their facility going to be able to support patients on a larger scale. And that's definitely appropriate in that setting.
So it can be monetized. That's
Oh
the
yeah,
bottom line.
absolutely.
But also it can just be used much like a certification that you don't monetize every time you counsel somebody on diabetes. It's just one of those tools that you have, the knowledge that you have, another way that you can help a patient.
I will say though that when I was working direct to patient cash, I very much so layered in biblical counseling in my wellness coaching, right? It's all connected holistically. If you wanted to say, hey, how does this fit into billable services? If you're running a chronic care management program or remote patient monitoring program, and your patient is comfortable with discussing spiritual care as well as part of their comprehensive chronic care, I think that's appropriate, as long as it's not taking up the bulk of the billable time and you are addressing the patient's medical needs. But really, as I said, the best practice is to separate your biblical counseling sessions from your you know, billable medical services to make sure that you're not violating any issues there. I know that CMS did publish in their most recent um, literature that pastoral care is not considered covered for behavioral health management. So they have definitely specified that. And so I would say that legally, just be careful there with blurring the lines between billable services and biblical care, and just trying to keep them separate there. But I understand that it's difficult to even find patients' time to meet with you multiple times to address something that's happening holistically.
Well, I wish you luck as you continue to write this book. I understand that you have a deadline that you've set for yourself. What is that?
Yeah, I would like to see it published by the end of 2023. We'll see if I can push that along here.
All right. Well, I wish you luck. And for anybody who's wondering, could this book be for me? Who's your audience? I mean, who are you writing this for?
Yeah, it's really for anyone who's looking to see how they can connect patients to biblical care as a part of their holistic, comprehensive care. It's really to figure out what that looks like. Where do you get started? If you want to be certified to do it yourself, or you just want to connect with people who are doing it, how do you go about doing that? And what does that entail? What does it look like in practice? So just kind of giving you a peek under the hood, as you would say, Kim, as to what that
Yes.
would look like.
Behind the scenes. People love the behind the scenes. Now, I could just see this becoming some sort of a book club thing where, you would lead, I don't know, a dozen people, right? 12 is a great number for the Bible. So let's go with 12 people. So maybe you would have 12 people and you could go through the book together and make sure that they're sucking all the juice out of the fruit, so to speak. Make sure they get every little detail out of it that you intended as you wrote it. So I just wanted to plant that seed, make sure that you have some sort of a workbook, because this sounds like a really great book that could help a lot of people and also be really great for a book club type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about that, Kim, and basically what I came to the decision was, hey, I don't need to recreate the wheel. I could basically just share the same resources that I use to get equipped and walk people through that as a part of PBH offerings. For if somebody wants me to walk them through getting certified and they want to get equipped and kind of understand what resources I have to be able to practice more efficiently and effectively with patients. Here's what I've got, and let me work with you one-on-one to set up your own practice to doing this, and understanding how you can collaborate with local practitioners to provide these services.
I love it. That's awesome. Cool.
Absolutely.
I think that it's a very Christian thing to say, to walk with someone as they try to do something. And I like that you have that in mind. And I wish you lots of luck with it all.
Thank you. Must be the Holy Spirit shining through. I thank you. I really appreciate that, Kim.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm excited for you. I'll be checking in with you throughout 2023 to see how you're doing, just to give you a gentle nudge and see how it's going.
Please do, friend. Please do.
All right. Well, let's transition to the third and final topic that we're going to get to today. You have a YouTube vlog. It is called Lick, Stick, and More. What is it, and what do you talk about on there?
Lick, Stick, and More came about because I found that there were different things that I was exploring that I figured, if I needed to know this, somebody else probably needs to know it too, right? So just sharing out different solutions or different people who can shine as a light of inspiration, a beacon, if you will, of what's possible in our industry, whether it be pharmacists or other practitioners. What are they doing? What are some other things that we could be doing to better serve our patients? And what are the tools that are working? And sharing that, or just even mindset shifts, right? Like I'll have thoughts sometimes about things that really help me to move forward with my practice, and just sharing out those strategies, whether it be things like time management or understanding what are some tools that I can use for time management, right? And sharing that. I think also just layering in the scripture that empowered me and uplifted me in times of uncertainty um, through these episodes is probably the most important aspect to me, to being able to serve as a source of hope for the Holy Spirit to work through me, to impact others, because as we know, his word does not return void. And so I'll get messages sometimes from people randomly saying, I'm so glad that you shared that. It impacted me, and thank you. And it really does encourage me to spur on, to lift other people up and stir them up in their faith, to really practice in a God-honoring way. That's really the true goal of the podcast. Has transformed from just being a business development podcast to really helping to strengthen people in faith, with taking a faith-centered approach to how they practice, and doing that in a God-honoring way. So that's really, Lick, Stick, and More is a place that I can share out people like yourself, Kim. We did an episode on and released that this past month as our most recent episode, on the pharmacist's voice and how pharmacists can leverage their voice to have an impact on others. And that was a
And thank you for
blessing.
having me on. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
that.
coming and sharing, because you are a perfect example of the type of beacons of light that I strive to share through that channel.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have watched a few episodes, but for anybody out there who has not looked up your YouTube vlog or podcast, however we want to call this, it is called Lick, Stick, and More. You can find it on YouTube. And what is a good episode to start with?
Well, it really depends on what your focus is or what you're looking for. For people who are looking to start their own consulting practice, I really enjoy the episode. I share it a lot, called Transitioning to Consulting. A lot of people struggle with trying to figure out what that leap of faith looks like. How do I transition from my full-time fitting into someone else's box into doing what I was called to do, to serve others? And how did you do that? Spiritually and physically, what does it take? What does it entail? What are the steps for that? So that episode, I think, was particularly useful. And then I had alluded to earlier, the other episode that I share out often is the time management episode. A lot of the practitioners that I work with, it really comes down to tightening up on their time and how they're managing it efficiently and effectively to be able to drive implementation of different programs forward. And how do you manage the time that you're spending with your counselees or your patients or clients, or even your friends and family? How do you do that? And so sharing some of the strategies around what I found success with, or other mentors or thought leaders that I've worked with are using, and sharing that in that episode as well. So those are just a couple that I'm leaning to a lot. Then, of course, there are a couple episodes on remote patient monitoring, chronic care management for those who don't really know what it is or what it's about. They can learn a little bit more on those there.
Well said. Those are some great examples. And I must say, as somebody who has watched the channel, there are some pharmacists on there, and there are some people who are in the biblical realm as well. So there's a good mix, and there's some Nandita in there too. Yeah, they're good. Yeah. They're good. And a couple of things real quick, a couple of the things that I really like about what you do. You include some visuals like videos and still images, and any questions that you ask tend to go on their own slide. So in case you were just, washing your dishes or something and you're like, oh, I didn't quite get that, you can look over and you can read the question, and it's just well done. I like it.
Thank you, Kim. That means a lot coming from someone who's a thought leader in this industry as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I only have audio, but you've got all these visuals too, which is powerful. Yeah, much respect. I like how you roll.
Thank you. It is a lot of work. At one point, I was doing it weekly, and it was exhausting. It can be time consuming. It can be expensive. I leverage teams to support with the production and editing and all of that as well. I do a lot of the work myself with getting it all set up for them, but they polish it up for me and help me to support me with getting it out and distributed. But yeah, I had to scale back to once a month because I do care to have something that would actually be useful to whoever is taking a look at it or listening in. And I want it to be just good content, good quality content, and a good representation of whoever or whatever it is that I'm trying to share.
You should always care about the person on the other end, and you're doing it right because you care about putting out quality content.
Thank you, Kim.
Keep up the good work.
Well, I do adore you, so I wouldn't want to do you less justice than you deserve.
Well, thanks. You did me right. And I think mine was episode 28, if I remember right. So check out episode number 28 of Lick, Stick, and More on the Perfect Balance Healthcare YouTube channel, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Subscribe. And I hope that you guys all enjoy it and find something that you can take away that will impact your lives positively and the people you serve.
Awesome. Thank you, Nandita. Is there anything else you'd like to share about anything, your YouTube channel, biblical counseling, or Perfect Balance Healthcare?
Well, I just love meeting other people. So, whether you're a pharmacist or not, or you're hearing this and you feel like there's something that I'm doing that you wanted to hear more about or learn more about, or there's something I can support you with, and you feel like I'm equipped to do that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on any of the social media sites. You can email me, n@P as in Peter, B as in boy, H as in Henry, pbh.life. So that's n.koodie@pbh.life. And I will be more than happy to share my calendar link out to you. If you can't find it through my email, you can always find it on my LinkedIn and connect with me there so I can support you.
Thanks for sharing that. And thank you for being here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast to share how you use your voice as a pharmacist. Merry Christmas, Nandita, and you take care.
Thank you so much, Kim, for having me. I wanted to send us off with a little bit of scripture here, if I could, for the holiday season.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm in Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward, even forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. I just wanted to say thank you for having me at this time to celebrate the birth of our Savior and Lord Jesus Christ. And I just pray that this episode would help to lift others up and elevate them to serve him and his people to his glory. Thank you, Kim, for having me. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you again, Nandita, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
It was a blessing to be here. Thank you. Likewise.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to episode 191 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes today, you will find a link to Perfect Balance Healthcare, Lick, Stick, and More, Dr. Nandita Koodie's LinkedIn profile, my social media links, and more. Please feel free to reach out to Nandita and me and connect. If you know someone who would like this podcast episode or needs to hear it, please share it with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks again for listening, and Merry Christmas.